Hello traders, welcome to the Nexoel Trading Hub YouTube channel. So we're going to be looking at the weekly forecast for the coming week, and we are going to start from the dollar index. This is the monthly time frame. So we identified the monthly bullish fair value gap when we were in the month of April, and we wanted to see how price was going to trade into the monthly bullish fair value gap, because we identified the sell side liquidity, this pool of sell side liquidity here, and we wanted to see how price will take out this pool of sell side liquidity, and where is the zone below the sell side liquidity that price has a possibility of dropping into was the monthly bullish fair value gap here. And we can clearly see how price dropped into that, and we saw this bullish movement to the upside, this candle week here. And here we can see that the month of May is giving us this bullish colored candle. So after the delivery in the month of April, we can now establish this partial fair value gap. So with the mitigation of the monthly bullish zone, we could see the possibility of bullish movement to the upside into this bearish zone before we could see the possibility of bearish continuation, or we could see the possibility that price would now be going bullish in the dollar index. Let's check the weekly time frame. Here in the weekly time frame, what we can see is the mitigation of the monthly zone in confluence to the fact that we have this support level. So we have this pool of sell side liquidity. So this support level here gives us what? A pool of sell side liquidity, anticipating to see that price would take out the sell side liquidity, and clearly the delivery to the downside took out the sell side liquidity. And this candle in the most recent price delivery, what we can see is that took out the sell side liquidity, volume closed above. And last week we identified the weekly bearish fair value gap after we saw price mitigated the monthly bullish fair value gap zone. So we saw the weekly bearish fair value gap zone as the drawn liquidity when price took out the sell side liquidity. So this is the internal range liquidity where we expected to see price would trade into. And clearly what we can see is that price traded into the weekly bearish fair value gap. But though we can see that volume did not really trade into the fair value gap zone. So we could have the possibility of what? Bullish continuation the coming week, because now we can see that this candle took out sell side liquidity, volume closed above, and we can see that the volume of last week delivery closed above the high of this previous weekly candle. So we could see bullish continuation because price here have not even mitigated the mean threshold of this weekly bearish fair value gap. And weeks also has sponsorship zone, because when we drop to lower time frame, we're going to find institutional zone within this candle week price zone. So we could see price may trade more higher above this weekly bullish fair value gap, just to mitigate the sponsorship zone in lower time frame that is above this weekly bearish fair value gap. So for the coming week, I'm looking forward to the possibility of bullish movements into this fair value gap zone. But we must understand that the dollar index is actually what? Bearish. So let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, if you can remember vividly, last week I pointed to this bullish order block, how we saw price mitigated the monthly bullish fair value gap zone and created this bullish candle to the upside. We had this volume to the upside. Price closed above the last down close candle. So what we can see, we have a bullish order block, and we saw how Wednesday retested that. Friday didn't even dip lower. So I told us to see the possibility that price would dip lower to retest again the volume of the last down close candle, mitigate the open price before we have a bullish continuation. And in the 4-hour time frame, we established that we saw price traded above liquidity gap, which in the daily time frame we can also see here we have this liquidity gap here. Price traded above that, and we saw price return to retest it and facing rejection to the upside. So I told us we could see price return to seek sell side liquidity and the bullish continuation, and that was what clearly happened last week, because I established the fact that we have the weekly bearish fair value gap, and within the weekly bearish fair value gap here in the daily time frame we have this liquidity gap, which I'm looking forward to the possibility of price trading into the weekly bearish fair value gap, because within the weekly bearish fair value gap we have this liquidity gap to be filled. So we still have the possibility of bullishness, because now we can see here we had this up close candle, but price traded to the downside, and bullishness closing above this, price return to retest, and we are seeing rejection. So we could see bullish continuation to the upside. And if price goes more higher, when price return into the weekly bearish fair value gap. They'll be looking at the daily bearish fair value gap as the zone that price may possibly trade into. And you can see in confluence we have, this is where we had the buy movement before the sell movement to the downside that took out the sell side liquidity we have here. So we could see price trade more higher above the weekly bearish fair value gap because we have this daily bearish fair value gap zone. So let's check the 4-hour time frame. So here in the 4-hour time frame, clearly you can see the liquidity void I pointed out to us from the daily. So we can also see that here in the 4-hour time frame. I'm really sorry that the dog is barking. So we can see how price return to retest, return again to the upside, price return to the downside to retest where price traded above, the gap price traded above. So we had a sell side liquidity here. So last week I told us if we want to continue bullish, that we could see price trade to the downside into this fair value gap, and we have the bullish continuation to the upside. And we can see how price read to the downside, though price did not really dip into the 4-hour bullish fair value gap here, and we had the bullish continuation into the weekly bearish fair value gap. So price just tapped just a little. Price did not really trade even into the mean threshold of that. Price did not dip above into that. So what we can now see is when you look at this from a trend line perspective, you can see when you draw a trend line, you're going to be having an uptrend here. But we understand that the dollar index is bearish. So to the most current price delivery and to the fact that we have an institutional zone here, a fair value gap, and also in the 4-hour where we have that daily bearish fair value gap, we can see we have a 4-hour bearish fair value gap here. So we could see that possibility of bullishness to the upside. So from the 4-hour time frame, clearly what I'll be looking at is how price reacts at this bullish order block. If price doesn't violate this bullish order block in lower time frame like the 15-minute time frame, 5-minute time frame, and price gives us a buy model, then we continue bullish to the upside. But even lower time frame like the 15-minute or 5-minute time frame, we see that price violates this bullish order block established here in the 4-hour time frame. Then we'll be looking at bearish movement to the downside, and I'll be targeting this 4-hour bullish fair value gap, and in extension to see the possibility that price will keep going lower to take out this low point, because we know that the dollar index is bearish, but now we have a bullish price delivery. So we could see what bullish continuation, because we've identified sponsorship zone here that we are expecting to see the possibility that price will trade into. So this is a bullish order block. So I'll be looking at how price reacts here. If price respects this, price may dip the main threshold and we have bullish continuation. Except price violates this, I'm not really going to go strongly bearish in the dollar index. I'll be looking at bullish opportunity when price is reacting at this bullish order block. So let's check the 1-hour time frame. So here in the 1-hour time frame, we can see that we have bullishness in the most recent price delivery. Let's pick out a trend line so we can see that we are having what? An uptrend market delivery here based on this trend line. So if price wants to continue bullish to the upside, then I'll be seeing how price reacts here. So we want to see how price may possibly trade to the downside. Here we have a breakout block. This is an up close candle before the bearish movement here that took out this low point, because this is a pullback. So if price returns here and gives us a buy model, then we want to continue bullish to the upside. This is what I'm pointing out to. If we have the movement of price to the downside and we have a buy model created, then we want to continue bullish to the upside. Except price violates the zone, then we may see bearishness. First, we'll be looking at this zone here, this 4-hour bullish fair value gap. If price strongly violates that, then we will see how price would continue more bearish to the downside. So this is what I'm looking at in the dollar index. I'll be looking at the possibility of bullish continuation from this zone. And if price violates that bullish order block, then we may see bearishness to the downside. So this is all I have to show us in the dollar index. Let's check out the EURUSD pair. This is EURUSD from the monthly time frame. So we can also see that EURUSD traded to the upside, taking out buy side liquidity. So we could see the possibility of price giving us bearishness. This bearish order block may reclaim price before we could have the possibility of bullish continuation, or we may see price keep dipping to the downside if the dollar index continues bullish. But if the dollar index continues bearish, that we could see price just gets reclaimed by this, and then we have bullish continuation to the upside. But basically, this is from the monthly time frame. Let's check the weekly time frame. So here in the weekly time frame, what we can see is how price returned to mitigate this institutional order flow zone, because I told us I wanted to see price takes out this buy side liquidity, because when price printed this weekly delivery, we considered that as relatively equal high points. We have buy side there, and we can see how price traded into this institutional order flow here in the weekly time frame, and we saw rejection to the downside. Price taking out the buy side liquidity resting here, and we can see also price took out this buy side liquidity, volume closed below, and we are seeing how price now traded to the downside. And we can see that the volume of the previous weekly candle closed below the low of this weekly candle, and to the downside, basically this is the drawn liquidity, this weekly bullish fair value gap, and this is the level we marked from the monthly time frame, the bearish order block that was violated, which I'm anticipating to see the possibility that that is going to reclaim price. So what we can see here in the weekly time frame, we have these words: bullish fair value gap. So I'm expecting to see the possibility of what bearish movements more into this zone in the coming week. So we have to wait to see how price trade into the zone the coming week before we could consider any possibility of bullish movements. Let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, what we can clearly see is price mitigated the weekly zone we marked, and price traded to the downside, a pullback here, and price now giving us the possibility of bearishness to the downside. So what we can see is price return to the upside into this daily bearish fair value gap, mitigated that, and we can see how that faced rejection and volume is trading to the downside, or volume traded to the downside on Friday. So here to me is pull off sell side liquidity, relatively equal low points. So I'm expecting to see the possibility of more bearishness. So this is the weekly bullish fair value gap zone, and we have the daily bullish fair value gap zone. So we may see price trade deeply into this before we can now look into the possibility of any bullishness. But for the coming week, the possibility I'm looking at is bearishness to the downside. So let's check the 4-hour time frame. Here in the 4-hour time frame, clearly, if you can remember the last week forecast, I told us we want to see price trade sweeps this high, and we have what bearish continuation, because we identify here as pool of what sell side liquidity, relatively equal low points. And here we can also see now we have another sell side liquidity resting here, relatively equal low points. Price failed to trade to the upside. Price traded to this rejection block here in the 4-hour time frame, and we saw the bearishness as anticipated to take out the sell side liquidity. So now what we can see from the daily, we identify price traded into the daily bearish fair value gap, had a rejection, and now we can see bearishness to the downside. So in the Euro USD, since I'm expecting the possibility of bullishness in the dollar index, so I'm expecting to see the possibility of what bearish continuation here in Euro USD. This is the weekly bullish fair value gap zone. We can see price did not mitigate that, and within that and slightly below that is the daily bullish fair value gap. So I'll be expecting bearish possibilities in Euro USD to the downside, except price really decides to do otherwise. But I'll be looking at that possibility for bearishness to the downside in the Euro USD. So let's check out the GBPUSD pair, guys. This is GBPUSD from the monthly time frame. It's not as clear as the Euro USD. So in GBPUSD, we've been following this bullish movement for a long time from this rejection block, and we can see how price traded to the upside, taking out this buy side liquidity within the month of April candle. So we can't really spot out what we really need to anticipate here in the monthly time frame, aside the fact that price has taken out this buy side liquidity, and we may see the possibility of price pulling to the downside before the possibility of bullish movement to the upside, or we could see bearishness if the dollar index gets strongly bullish. So here in the weekly time frame, what we saw was the fact that here I identify here as our drawn liquidity, relatively equal high points from this previous weekly candle delivery, expecting to see price trades to the upside because we established the drawn liquidity to be this bearish fair value gap. above this buy side draw on liquidity. So we can see clearly that price traded into that and a rejection to the downside, taking out this high and taking out the high of this previous weekly candle. So here we have the weekly bullish fair value gap zone. So clearly my drawn liquidity to the downside is this weekly candle low and the weekly bullish fair value gap zone here. So I'm expecting to see how price would give us movement to the downside in GBPUSD also. But we must understand that the correlation between the EURUSD and the GBPUSD, we know they are positively correlated, but we can see thus far that their movement, the volume of their movement is not really in confluence as other times. So we can see that now we have the weekly bullish fair value gap here, which I'm expecting to see price gives us the movement to the downside. So let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, after price took out our buy side liquidity into the weekly bearish fair value gap, we can see the bearish movement to the downside. And here price returned to retest this breaker and we can see rejection. So we have the weekly bullish fair value gap zone here. So I'm seeing the possibility of price validating our anticipation to see that price trades more bearish to the downside, since we can see this rejection. So price here took out this high point already, so we may see price seek the sell side liquidity. And within the weekly bullish fair value gap here in the daily time frame, we have this daily bullish fair value gap. So my anticipation is to see more bearishness. I'm not yet going to look at bullish movements until price really trades into this weekly bullish fair value gap. And if the dollar index is strongly bullish, doesn't really continue bearish, if we have that possibility, then we could see that what the GBPUSD as well as the EURUSD will keep dipping more lower. But then if we look at the forecast that we've given for the dollar index and everything works fine, when price trades into the weekly zone and decides to give the bearish continuation, then we could see price here trade into this and we may see bullishness. But I'll be looking at price dipping more lower to the downside. Let's check the 4-hour time frame. In the 4-hour time frame, what we can clearly see is last week I pointed the fact that from the 1 hour we identify an order block, price may react there and give us bullish continuation. Except price violates that, then we may see bearishness to this bullish order block within this weekly bullish fair value gap zone. But that didn't happen. Price respected the 1 hour order block. We're going to check the 1 hour time frame and give the bullish movement into the zone, and now we are seeing the bearishness to the downside. So you can see, you can't really identify a zone here aside from the fact that we are seeing bearish movement to the downside. So we have a drawn liquidity here to the downside. So I'll be looking to see how price dips to the downside. If price drops to the downside, violating this bullish order block, then I'll keep riding bearish to the downside. Let's check the 1 hour time frame. So here in the 1 hour time frame, you can clearly see the order block I was making reference to. You can check the previous weekly forecast. You will clearly see that I pointed that out, that if price returns and respect this, then we are going to see bullishness. If it violates that, then we're going to see our bearishness. So this depends on your understanding your entry models. So we can see when price return into this bullish order block, we can see we have the single candle order block model, and price clearly gave us the bullish movement to the upside. And clearly the other confirmation I had to when price mitigated this was how we saw price here took out the Asia session low before giving us this bullish movement. So we anticipated a pullback and bullish continuation to the upside. So when price returned into the zone, and then it started giving the bearish movement. So when you check the EURUSD, you're not going to see this impulsive buy movement to the upside in the EURUSD, but you can see that is present in the GBPUSD pair. So we are looking at the possibility of what bearish continuation. So in the GBPUSD, when I'm bearish, I'll be looking at how price would dip into this 4-hour bullish order block, which is within the weekly time frame bullish fair value gap zone. The violation of that then would give us the possibility of continuing more bearish to the downside. So this is my anticipation in GBPUSD. Let's check out the USDJPY pair. This is USDJPY and this is a weekly time frame. So For the past previous week, we identify how price reacted at this rejection block, and we saw bullishness. I told us to anticipate bullishness. Then last week, we clearly established that we have this weekly bearish fair value gap, and in extension, this candle week. And I told us to see more bullish reaction to the upside before the possibility of any bearish continuation to the downside, because the USDJPY, we can see the delivery is bearish. So price gave us a delivery to the upside last week. And what we can see here is volume have closed above this candle that swept sell side liquidity. So what I'm looking forward to see is the possibility of higher prices into this unmitigated candle week. If price trades above this candle week, then we're looking at this weekly bearish fair value gap zone. So this is the anticipation for the coming week. Let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, we can clearly see in the daily time frame the rejection block. So price reacted here and started giving this bullish movement to the upside. So we can see the zone we marked from the weekly time frame, the unmitigated week level we marked from the weekly time frame. We can see it here in the daily time frame. So I'm expecting the possibility of higher prices to the upside, because what we can see here is price gave us this bearish order block, but the bearish order block was violated here in the daily time frame. Price violated that bearish order block. We can see an engulfing candle here. The last up close candle, price traded to the downside, engulfing that, but then price traded back to the upside. Price returned to retest it, so we could see the possibility of a bullish continuation. So this will be my first targets, and in extension, I'll be looking at, if price doesn't react here to give a sell movement, then we'll be looking more to the weekly bearish fair value gap zone. So this is my expectation in the USDJPY, and we can clearly see in the daily time frame we are in a bearish market condition. Let's check the 4-hour time frame. So here in the 4-hour time frame, if you can remember vividly, last week I told us to expect bullish movement into this 4-hour bearish fair value gap, and then we could see the possibility of selling from that 4-hour fair value gap in lower time frames. So now we can see how price traded into that and give us a sell movement to the downside. So we can see that we have a trend here, an uptrend here in the 4-hour time frame. So we could see the possibility of a bullish continuation. That is what I'm looking forward to see in USDJPY, the possibility of bullish continuation, because here is the level of the unmitigated week from the weekly time frame, and above that is the weekly bearish fair value gap. So clearly here we can see we have liquidity, buy side liquidity resting here. Even though what we can see is that price traded to the downside, return took out this buy side liquidity, mitigating this 4-hour fair value gap, but price did not mitigate the mean threshold. So we could see the possibility of bullish continuation to the upside. So if I'm bullish, I want to trade bullish. First level to see price possibly take out this, and in extension we look at the weekly level here. If price still continues strongly bullish, they'll be looking at the weekly bearish fair value gap, which in the 4-hour time frame we can see we have this fair value gap, except price decide to do otherwise to continue bearish to the downside. But I'm looking at bullish possibilities, especially if price delivers to the upside here and we see price violate this zone, and we can look forward to maybe price retesting and we have continuation to the upside. So this is my expectation in the USDJPY pair. Let's check the 1-hour time frame. So here in the 1-hour time frame, we can see price traded to the upside here. Price came into the 4-hour bearish fair value gap, and we had this fall to the downside. So you can see the level we marked from the weekly time frame. Here we have a bearish order block. You can see here we have the up close candle before this bearish movement that took out this low points. So we may see that bullish continuation to that level. And if price violates that, then we trade to the weekly bearish fair value gap zone. So this is my anticipation in USDJPY. But we know that the overall trend is bearish, but most recent delivery we are seeing bullish movements to the upside. And then we've identified the probable bearish zone that may give us the bearish continuation. So let's check out the gold pair, and this brings us to the end of the weekly forecast, guys. Here in gold, what we can see from the weekly time frame is last 2 weeks we can see how price took out buy side liquidity. So we expected to see price straight to the downside, and then we have bullish movement to the upside. But clearly what we can see is price traded to the downside and volume closed bearish. So here in the weekly time frame, we have this weekly bullish fair value gap zone, and we have this candle wick. So I'm expecting the possibility of price giving us more bearishness to the downside into this weekly bullish fair value gap zone. And I've been pointing out to the fact that when we have such long candle wicks within such candles, when we drop to lower time frame, we can also identify sponsorship zones. So if price dips lower than this weekly bullish fair value gap, then it's going to dip into this candle wick, which in a lower time frame, we're going to find a sponsorship zone. So let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, we can see here is where we have the weekly bullish fair value gap zone, which I'm looking for to the possibility of price still trading to the downside to take out the sell side liquidity resting here. And if price then trades into this weekly bullish fair value gap zone, we may see price dip more lower into this daily bullish fair value gap zone. Because here we have the movement to the upside, price traded to the downside, taking out sell side liquidity, mitigated this fair value gap and bullishness to the upside. You can see that this mitigation is in confluence to this breakout block. So here is the breakout block, because this is the up close candle before the bearish movement that took our sell side liquidity. So price may trade to the downside, also mitigating the breakout block, the high that was broken to the upside. So this is weekly bullish fair value gap. This is the daily. So we have the possibility of seeing more bearishness into this zone. So I am looking more to bearish movements before we could look into any bullish continuation. So I want to see the possibility of how price will trade into this weekly bullish fair value gap zone and dipping more further into the daily, the possibility of it dipping more further to the daily. So let's check the 4-hour time frame. So here in the 4-hour time frame, we can clearly see that we had this 4-hour bullish fair value gap where we expected to see price will mitigate, and we may see that bullish continuation because this sicked sell side. Yeah, we had bullish movement, but that failed to continue bullish, and we started seeing this consolidated movement. And finally, price traded to the downside, violating this bullish fair value gap and even the order block. And now we can see price created here a bearish fair value gap here in the 4-hour time frame, return to retest, and price respected the mean threshold, and we're seeing price giving us bearish tendency. Though what we can see here in the 4-hour time frame is that price is reacting to this block here. So price is reacting to this block. So if price violates this block, if price violates this, then we're looking at what bearish movement into the zones. They'll be looking at what the bearish continuation, because clearly here it is. We have this bearish fair value gap here, and we can see how price traded into it, respecting the mean threshold and trading to the downside into this bullish order block. So if we really do not have any clear buy model in the lower time frame from this mitigation, then there is no need to want to consider buy movement. And if we are considering buy movement in lower time frame, then we're going to be buying into this candle wick, because price may just return here, and then we have the bearish continuation to the downside. So this is what I'm looking at. This is what I'm projecting to you guys. In lower time frame, if you want to take this buy move, because you see price reacting at this bullish order block, then just trade bullish to this candle wick in a lower time frame, like the 5 minutes, by refining the 15 minutes zones also. So want to trade into this candle wicks, and what we'll be looking at is the possibility that now price may give us what? The bearishness to the downside. That is if price decides to respect this zone to want to give a little bullish movement to the upside. So you want to trade that bullish movement back into this candle wick. So this is the conservative target you'll be having in mind, or you just allow this trade to trade, whereby we may look at that price coming here, and if price gives the sell model, you sell to the downside, and except price then possibly gives us a movement that violates that, then we are bullish. But for the delivery thus far, I'm looking at what? The bearish possibility. Price taking out this low point, this sell side liquidity into the weekly bullish fair value gap, and price may dip more lower into the daily, because that is where we have where price broke the high points. So this is my expectation and anticipation in the gold pair, and this is what I'll be looking forward to. I'm not going to follow a time frame. I'm not checking the 1 hour time frame. So I'm just giving us a quick forecast. So cheers and God bless you till I come your way next week again, guys.